Hi everyone and welcome back to the Paperless Movement YouTube channel. Today I talked to Lane Shackleton. So Lane, thank you very much for being on the show. It's really exciting to talk about Coda because I know a lot of people in my audience look at Coda. We have obviously the big elephant in the room, Notion. Haha, you got this. Evernote is there as well, of course. And this is what we will talk about as well, you know, the competition. But before we start, for those who don't know Coda, what is Coda all about? What can I do with this? Maybe you introduce yourself and Coda.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. My name's Lane. I lead the product and design teams at Coda. And yeah, Coda is basically an all-in-one doc that blends the best of sheets, docs, spreadsheets, and applications. And the whole idea is basically someone can start with something really simple, like writing notes, collaborating with their team, writing a project brief, more of those document-centric things. But then if the tool needs to, it can evolve to build, a doc that can be as powerful as an app that can accomplish a specific workflow. So yeah, that's a little bit of I can give you, if you want, kind of the background, like the observations that we started Coda with.
Yeah, that would be interesting. If we go to the site, we see an introduction there that all started with docs. And in the end, it's always the same in the background. And I was talking with the CEO from Todoist about this as well. I mean, in the end, we have databases in the back end. It's always about how we present them in the front end and how we connect it together in the most efficient way for the people to use and so on. So it's really interesting. What was actually the challenge you had, or actually the problem you wanted to solve with Coda? And yeah, we go with this.
Yeah, I mean, the company basically started with two main observations. The first observation is that, like you said, docs and sheets kind of run the world. So, there are lots of apps out there. There's an app for everything. There are all types of niche applications. But at the end of the day, if you go and talk to someone on a Wednesday, we're talking on a Wednesday, and say, like, how does the work actually get done? They'll end up pulling up, tons and tons of tabs that are full of docs and sheets. And, and so the observation behind that is that people, default back to the flexible tool. So there are a bunch of tools, a bunch of specific apps that have their way of doing something, but oftentimes people end up exporting from those tools and doing it their own way, or they want something a little bit further than that app delivers. And so they end up going back to the more flexible version. So World runs on docs and sheets is sort of one piece of this, but I think a corollary to that is that docs and sheets haven't really changed fundamentally in 40 years. Like if you go look at WordStar and VisiCalc and some of these early programs in this space, and you put them next to Excel and Sheets, it's basically the same updated UI, moved to the cloud, but you're still dealing with like the same primitive. So as an example of what I mean by that, A12 means something to a spreadsheet user. It's, as Brett Victor would say, it's playing computer in your head. It says, triangulate this value. We call it battleship coordinates. Triangulate this value in the spreadsheet. But to a human, those things mean nothing, right? Or they shouldn't have to mean something. Unfortunately, they do. And so, that's an example of a primitive that hasn't really changed all the way back from when VisiCalc was an accounting software to, someone working on a team in a spreadsheet today. And so, the whole idea behind this was like, what if we started from scratch? What if we didn't have to worry about backward compatibility? What if we, just sort of invented from the start? So that's sort of the first observation. The second observation is that, in every family, in every team, in every organization, there are a set of organizers that are really, really important. So in a family, this might be the person who, plans the family trip. In a team, this might be the person who organizes meeting notes or your goals or OKRs or something like that. In an organization, they might run broader people processes, et cetera. So the kind of concept here is that these makers end up being the people that like organize everything. And so these are really important folks, and we should really serve them well. And if you step all the way back, I worked on YouTube actually for a long time. All of these are instances where a gatekeeper gets removed. So in the case of YouTube, it was like the studio exec no longer has to okay the show. Tom can make the show about productivity and put it out there to the world, get a bunch of subscribers, and people watch, and it's cool. And in our case, I think the equivalent is people no longer have to ask software engineers to help them automate a process or build something that feels application-like, that feels powerful without writing code in some instances. So the idea here is that Coda is just a part of a longer arc that we end up calling the maker generation, where these people play a really central role.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I really like this mindset already behind this, because people follow me, they know my saying, we should start leveraging the digital world instead of just living in it. And I think there are so many things popping up, like when I talked to Ian Small, the CEO from Evernote, we talked about tags, and only 2% of the users are actually using tags. And I said, oh, I think about this. It's not because people not using it because it's not useful. It's just because they don't have the thinking. We transitioned from paper notebooks to a digital world. So if we have something like the iPad and the Apple Pencil, people convert much easier nowadays to the digital world because they can keep their workflows. But now I think it's on us to show them what else we can do in the digital world to really step up the game. So I really like this approach to rethink and really start from scratch. And what I hear about this, that's all about spreadsheets and docs and so. I agree, people go back to this. But I think, and I hear already that you agree, but maybe you don't, so you let me know. It's all about connecting or structuring the documentation and the spreadsheets in the right way, so it's actually efficient to find the information. Because what I see all over again and again, and something that I teach in my Inner Circle membership as well, is how to find the information. There's no point taking notes the whole day, and then in the end of the day, you don't know what you actually collected there or where to find it, and you start struggling once you use it, once you need it. So maybe you can tell us a bit more about how you actually structure documents and spreadsheets, how it's built up in Coda.
Yeah, I think that's, I agree with a lot of that, those observations. I mean, I think for us, part of what all-in-one means is it means that you can take something that traditionally has been disconnected. So in the case of a doc, like I was a product manager at YouTube and Google for a while. I would write a doc and I would link to that doc from a spreadsheet. And the spreadsheet, if you think about this sort of fundamentally, the spreadsheet has no knowledge of what's in that doc. And so what you would see is you'd see a lot of different artifacts of this kind of like fundamental disconnect between these two things. As an example, I would keep a task, a set of tasks for my team in a spreadsheet, but there was no context around the tasks. And so you had, engineers, designers, et cetera, wondering, now, why am I doing this again? And one simple thing when you put those two things together is that everything's sort of like one click away. So, the tasks are in one page, and then one click up is why we're doing it. What's the press release that we think we're going to write to users? How are we benefiting people's lives by shipping this? Okay, now you can go back to there's a laundry list of bugs that we got to go fix and things like that. But when you sort of break down the walls of these things have to be disconnected just because someone made the choice that these are going to be 3 separate programs instead of one, I think you go a long way. Now, what you said about structure is really important. So I think one of the things that we talk a lot about and think a lot about is blending what you get from databases and structured data with unstructured data. And so lots of fun instances of this in the gallery. One of my favorites, just like a small one, is, a team's going through a naming process. They're trying to figure out what to call their YouTube channel, what to call their product, whatever it is. They can take a table of names, and then they can take that name and put it in a bunch of different sentences with a formula, let someone pick that particular name, and then see how each name is going to play out in all these sentences. So like that's a really concrete and specific example of blending, a database with the canvas. But I think, more and more instances of this blended, writing surface with kind of the structure of a database becomes incredibly important as a team. One of our kind of classic use cases is a project brief, where a team starts by writing a brief, and then they have a meeting about it, and so their meeting notes are in the same place as their project brief. And then after that, some days later, they decide we better start writing down our tasks and better start designing and making things. And so all of that being in one spot, by its nature, the team now goes to one link instead of like 6 different links. So sort of back to the mini tabs. I think, something that we think a lot about.
Yeah. A lot of great things that we can talk about now, the things that you just mentioned here. And what comes to my head right away is the word, or the phrase, single source of truth. That is something that I'm praying or preaching over the time, praying as well, that people will do. But this is really the hard thing. When it comes to single source of truth, we have different approaches there. I had a client, he was taking notes the whole day. All right, from different meetings. He was a project manager of several projects. And then in the end of the day, he had 1 hour where he sat down and processed the notes and created a task out of it and so on. I just said to him, why don't you take the notes on the place where they belong to? I mean, that's when I'm team coaching and so on, I always say, find tool, and it doesn't matter what tool you actually use nowadays. All of them have the same principles, more or less, with different feature sets. I mean, for example, if you use Asana, it's very basic, the commenting and the description. But if you're using something like Coda, Notion, ClickUp, you have much more rich content that you can add there. But in the end of the day, it's the method behind it. You go into the meeting and you take the notes directly on the task, what was discussed and so on. So you just mentioned this as well. You start there. And I'm working in big industry for 7 years now, with 300,000 employees in there. And we still get emails of meeting minutes. And I think that's so pointless, these things. They end up in an archive of the email program because you just had the meeting. And everybody has it still fresh in their minds. So no need to read the meeting. And then you start searching for this. So absolutely with you. We need to have something like this. But talking about single source of truth, we come to the next thing and the next issue, which is the all-in-one solution. So we have one app to rule them all, yeah. And this is something where it becomes complicated, I think. If you have something like Todoist, which is very specialized, they can really focus on certain functionalities. So how do you tackle this? What is too much? What is too less? Is there any framework or boundaries that you want to stay in with your application?
Yeah, I mean, maybe touch on the thing you said before. I think that relates to something that we think a lot about as well, which is we think that people should shape their tools and shape their workflows and not the other way around, right? Mm-hmm. And if you think about a lot of kind of enterprise software, it is the application developer who has no idea what your specific needs are, has no idea of the context of your team, is building something, and they're building something that's lowest common denominator across thousands of teams, right? And so in many ways, I think part of why we're trying to blend these things that traditionally don't get blended, application-like things, buttons and automations and tables and things like that, is so that people can craft the tool that suits their team instead of the other way around. So I agree with, I mean, maybe that's a different take on where you were headed.
Yeah, especially in the big industries or the big enterprises, there's usually a good salesperson of the tool and they sell it, and then you have to apply it, and it just doesn't fit into your team or whatever. And yeah, I can absolutely relate to this. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's in many ways like the story of software and businesses. And so I think our aspiration is that someone comes in, thinks holistically about how they want a team to run, how they want a process to run, and then is able to like shape the tool. A great example of that would be a friend of ours, Yuki, runs the product team at Figma, which is a design tool. And one of the first things that he did was came in and said, like, there's this meeting. A bunch of people don't like the meeting because they're just sharing status updates. Can we just make this a doc? And so the doc is basically an explanation of the meeting, and then a table with everyone's updates. And then now, instead of like everyone kind of hating the meeting, the key action he built this meeting around, or this doc around, was basically that you could heart updates, right? Like there's a little button and it's heart, and then there's next to the heart is a question. So you can either say this is great, or you can ask a question. And now we've kind of like, I think he shrunk the meeting down to 15 minutes instead of an hour. So he's saving people time, and at the same time he's making it interactive and fun. And that's like a concrete example of when you can shape the tool versus just plodding away and writing only meeting notes.
So there are options in Coda. So there are options in Coda to add gamification then in this case.
Yeah, and reactions, like those types of reactions, actually we're building out kind of a next version of it right now, because it's just been really interesting to see what makers do with simple icons that you can react to, but then use in a structured way. So you can do things like say, I want to count the number of reactions that this particular button had. So a very classic one in our meetings and many of our customers is, people will lay out a proposal and then they'll have a sentiment tracker, which is basically, how do you feel about this proposal? And so if you think about like the today construct is you listen to the highest paid person in the room talk about your proposal in front of 30 other people. And I think one awesome artifact of this sort of different behavior of sentiment trackers is you just go in the meeting, you say, read the proposal, and then add your sentiment. People add 1 through 5 smiley faces or whatever reaction icon you want. And then they write, here's what I think about it, here's what I like, here's what I don't like. And I think this is a really, that's like an example of being able to sort of get a more inclusive view of the world. You're going to find out that person who wasn't going to speak up in that meeting is going to say, I don't like this proposal because it contradicts this other thing that I'm trying to do. And you never would have known that. Or you would have, maybe heard about that a different way or later or something like that. So we're a little bit off on a tangent here.
Yeah, but I love this. That's a completely new aspect when we look at all the tools we have. I mean, we have something that is already very powerful, and that I also recommend to use is the thumbs up button in many task managers and so on, where you can say to the comment, okay, I like this, or actually that you let them know that you saw the comment. That's the important thing. So you can give quick feedback without writing anything. And this goes the same direction with a further step. And me as a business analyst, I love data, and I already see all the KPIs I can build up from this. And, also finishing the meeting and say, okay, now everybody can give thumbs up, thumbs down. I can reflect myself as the presenter, if it was good or not, and things like that. So really like that. Very powerful. So this is coming.
I'll give you another example. Well, actually, you can do that today. So there's a bunch of drag and drop templates in the app today. So if you do /pulse.
The voting. Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, that's
right. You can basically just drop those in. I'll give you a sort of simple example since you mentioned it. Like one of my favorite buttons to add to docs is just a mark as read button at the bottom. So like if you think about oftentimes what happens, you send out a doc that has a proposal in it, and you're sort of like, you send it out and then you wait, right? And it's who's going to start commenting, who's read it, who hasn't. Or you get into the meeting and you say, who's read the proposal? And you sort of look for the show of hands or whatever, which seems a little antiquated. So one of the buttons or drag and drop templates that you have in the app today is just a very simple mark as read button. So what happens is people read it, it says push this button if you've read it. You push the button, and then a list of people shows up, who's read it. And these little things transform the way meetings work. They transform the way that people operate. And it's awesome to come into a meeting and say, look, we got 20 people in this meeting, 15 people have read this, let's get going. We got sentiment here. And then the other one that's very commonly used is what we call Dory. It's named after the fish in Finding Nemo that asked all the questions. And that one's basically let people write a bunch of questions, and then you can upvote which question is most important, right? And this, I think, is another, just a behavioral shift in a meeting. So instead of listening to questions as they come up, instead of getting disruptive questions in a meeting, et cetera, what you end up seeing is people, the most important question that the group believes rises to the top because people can upvote questions, just sort of simple mechanics there. And so then you end up saying, we're going to, oftentimes you don't have time to get to all the questions, but hey, we're going to take all of those with over 5 votes and we're going to get to those. And then all the other ones I'm going to answer, after the meeting.
Yeah, I really like this, especially the upvoting, because something I also recommend is that you have a Kanban board or whatever, or just simply a list where everybody can just fill in their questions that arise. If you have a weekly meeting, for example, instead of daily, then they can fill this up and then you can work on this. Having a voting, you can prioritize so you can get through this in the same time. So this is really a good thing. And, I wanted to compare it to Notion and talk a bit about this. And I had already the feeling it's not really fair for Notion to talk about Coda. I mean, one of the big things that I keep complaining about Notion is really the lack of automations and APIs. Yeah, now they try to bring something up. Let's see what they bring up there. But this is something where I'm not happy seeing all these courses arising and saying you have this one and all solution. You can do everything with Notion. And yes, you can do some task dependencies. You just have to work 2 hours in order to implement them. So this is just, there goes my efficiency. And this is in Coda. I think the big difference is really that you have a lot more integration features and automation features. Automation out of the box inside Coda, but on the other hand, also integrations with other tools, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a key for us. So I think there's probably 3 things worth mentioning there, just to kind of pull apart the space, and we can talk about whichever one you want. So there's automations inside the doc. I can basically have a trigger and an action. So, on Monday morning, I have a personal doc that on Monday morning, email me this at 9 a.m. It's basically, how I think about how my week should go. On Friday, email me again, let me check in on how that went, right? That's a simple kind of contained automation set up with a trigger and an action. It's all based around the doc. Mm-hmm. The second thing is PAX, which is basically our integration framework. And I'm happy to go deep on PAX if it's interesting. The sort of quick version of PAX is basically, we think that you should be able to pull data in a very sort of Coda native way. So you should be able to drag your calendar in and see all of your events, just like a calendar, and sort of keep it up to date. That's the data in part. And that includes, if you're running a retail business, Shopify, or if you're running a customer-based business, Intercom, or, a bunch of different providers there. But importantly, we recognize that things don't just happen inside the doc. There's context around the doc that's really important, Slack, email, et cetera. And so some of our most used integrations on the PAX side, at least, are pushing data out. So I want this update to go to the team at 9 a.m. I'm going to send it as a Slack message. I'm going to let people subscribe to either Slack or email. They can get it however they want. Or I want to, take a set of events that I have on my calendar, do some manipulation on those, and then go out and just push one button and have that schedule a bunch of events on calendar. So I think recognizing that there's a data in component and a data out was sort of one fundamental piece of PAX. And we have a really exciting future on PAX that I can talk about too. And then the last piece is the API and Zapier. So basically, we built the API that was at heavy request of customers, very much recognizing that we want Coda, to be a place where you trust your data and you can house it. And then, of course, that means being able to get it out and write it into other tools, internal systems, et cetera, that we don't know about. And then that basically was an enabler for us to go out and build the Zapier integration. Zapier is an amazing tool. We have an amazing partnership with Zapier. And Wade and team have published docs on how they run their staff meeting on Coda, which is actually really cool. You check that out in the gallery. So those are sort of like the three, I think, components of how we think about automation and APIs.
Yeah, thank you very much for putting these apart. So this makes much more sense. But looking at Zapier, that's really something where I always think, if I'm a SaaS and I'm creating a new tool, I would focus on getting an API to Zapier. Because if people really want to have an automation in some way or form, then Zapier is the easiest way. I mean, we have Integromat and all these other things as well. But at least you have a very common thing. So as the company and the tool, you have already a much wider audience. I actually teach to my inner circle members as well the ICOR framework. That's a framework that I developed, which is stands for Input, Control, Output, Refine, which are the different parts of a productivity system. Because as I mentioned before, I don't like these, I have a method for you, but you have to use this tool in order to apply it. And the ICOR framework is about learning the different parts. And as I mentioned in the beginning about note-taking, this is actually the input part. And so many people are stuck in this input part and they don't know how to do the rest. And they struggle through the things. So this is how I try to connect this. So either people find one tool to cover all these different parts. And when I look at Coda, I see all the parts covered, isn't it? So I can certainly input things. Then I can control it. We will dive into this now next with databases. I want to talk about this next. And then we have the output part, which is task management, time management, and so on. You also mentioned you can bring in the calendar. You have some task management tools. And then we have the refine part, and you certainly have a lot of, to offer there when it comes to the blocks and the APIs and so on. So maybe you want to talk a bit more about the blocks, because it sounded like that there's more that you want to share. And then let's dive into the database.
Yeah. So you want me to dive deeper into packs, or you want me to
packs, not blocks? Sorry, packs. Yeah, packs.
Packs. So just to go a little bit deeper on the context, and then I'll go a little bit of where we're headed. I mean, packs, if you sort of break them apart even further, it's an authentication mechanism. So, 2 clicks and you should be authenticated to your calendar, to Intercom, to Shopify, to whatever service it is. And then it is a set of raw building blocks. And what I mean by that is, if you think of, I guess, let's take a little bit of a step back. So if you think about, you're trying to integrate 2 tools together, there are 2 ways to do that. One is that you hope that 2 tools do the integration that you want. You hope that Jira does the integration that you want with Asana. And if they don't, you don't have much recourse. You have to go ask some of these companies to do the integration differently. So that's one option. The other option is that you learn to write code, right? Like you're a JavaScript developer, you're a Python developer, and you understand how to build an auth client, and then you understand how to build sort of inputs and outputs with methods on an API. And so the conceptual thinking that went into packs was, okay, can we just take both of these things and make them really simple for anyone to use? Okay, the authentication thing, we should basically make sure that you're comfortable with the authentication that we're giving the stock. Okay, and then the second piece is, instead of having you peruse a giant API stock with all the things that you can do with a service, can we just take some of the common actions? If you're looking at Slack's API, a common action is going to be send a Slack message. and package that up in a way that you can just drag off a button that says send a Slack message, and then configure it by saying what message do you want to send and to which channel, right? So it's really taking the raw building blocks of some of these APIs and giving them to people inside of a surface that they're used to and familiar with, and making them configurable without having to write JavaScript, which is what I think makes Pax really unique. So, some artifacts of that construct is, instead of having just one integration to a doc, you can have like multiple integrations. You can start to compose these services onto each other. So you can bring in, to use your framework a little bit, you can bring in a set of inputs, you can bring in your customer data, you can do some manipulation on that, and then you can send it out to wherever your internal team consumes that, right? Or you can send it out as an update that's structured, that says, here's our goal for the week, customers wise, and here are the 3 customers that are going to contribute, and that's always sort of up to date. And it's going out in email form, and you've automated all of that, right? So that I think is sort of one core conceptual thing that is important to understand about Pax. If it's interesting, I can talk about where we're headed with Pax.
Yeah, so let's stay there for a moment.
Okay.
It is nice. I mean, I love things like this. I always say, if there's a recurring task, I need to automate it. If it is not automated, I have to make a task to actually automate it. Okay, never mind. But so I have no problem with this. But for the normal user, how complicated is it? I'm talking about the whole Coda setup. It is already also things like ClickUp and so on. They're very complex tools nowadays. So really people need to be trained. But there's still a framework which is very structured. Coda is a canvas. I can start from scratch and I have to have the idea. So how do you tackle this? Do you have consultants helping to implement this and things like that? Maybe we go more in this direction, that you can talk more about this.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's 2 things I would say there. The first is, we realized really early on that seeing what other people created was going to be important. It was going to be important for inspiration. It was going to be important to see, if you wanted to kind of poke behind the hood and say like, oh, you did that crazy automation. Like, can I just click on the configuration of that and see, what that button actually does, and learn the pattern and apply it? So, this idea of templates has been central from the very beginning. And so that started as like sort of full docs. And then more recently, the observation was, a lot of cases you've already started by writing the project brief, or you've already started your meeting notes, and you just want to drag in some of these compositions. So the ones that we talked about, where you just want to drag in the sentiment tracker just on your proposal after you've written it. More complex ones might be, I want to use one of these integrations, but at the same time, I don't want to have to worry about all the crazy configuration. So I just want to email a page, is like a classic example that our customers do a lot. There's a drag and drop template where you can say like, email a page, and then you input the email address, and then you input the page, and it's all set up for you, right? So these things have already been composed for you. So you really don't have to do a lot of the heavy lifting. I think that's a sort of really important piece. The other thing I would say is remixing, just to stay on that for one more second, remixing becomes really important. So an example, we talked about Yuki and the way he runs the product team at Figma. Interestingly, a bunch of product teams have picked up that doc and said, that's not exactly the way that we want to do it, but we're going to do it this slightly different way. So Zach at Brex, is another big company in the United States. And he remixed it to do, a slightly different version. There are countless other product teams that have now adapted that really, good foundation to their own companies. And so I think that, as we think about having to learn Coda, one aspect is like being inspired to come into the tool and say, wow, you can actually do that. And then the other piece is adapting, that inspiration to what you want to do. So that's sort of one whole bucket. The other, since you mentioned kind of consultants and people helping out, we certainly have an ecosystem growing up around us. and that's really exciting. Like I worked on AdWords a long time ago, a decade ago, and one of the most exciting things about AdWords was starting to see an ecosystem of search engine marketers grow up around the tool, and they became an increasingly important constituency. And so I think my guess is we're going to start to see exactly the same thing here. We already have a bunch of makers on our community who are helping people all the time. They're incredible at what they do. You can ask any question on the community and you're guaranteed to get a really robust response. And also, sort of looking ahead, we have more and more people who are actually making money by doing this, right? And using it as a vector for doing broader consulting and saying like, you have this idea for how this process should work, this workflow should work. I can build you that in Coda, and I can sort of, sell my own service, my own perspective on top of that. That to me is awesome. Like, I mean, yeah. It's similar to what we saw at YouTube as well. Like people, uploading videos, and then, and this is back a long time ago, 2006, 2007, uploading videos, not sure what's going to happen. And then suddenly we start sending them checks, and now they think, oh, I can actually make money from this. There's something interesting here. Eventually I can quit my day job. Eventually, this is what I want to do. I want to share my passion with the world. And so we have a lot of passionate makers who I think are on a very similar trajectory with Coda.
Yeah, I see it the same way. I mean, there's so much potential, and the thing about Coda now, and we compare it with Notion. Notion is a lot of hype, in my opinion, and a lot of people are using it, maybe because it's easy to grasp, and so many are already using it, and there's a huge community around this. I mean, there's not one student channel not talking about Notion. And Coda is somewhat in the background. It's just my personal feeling still. But I think I just saw that, you've been sponsored, or you raised money, isn't it? And you're going to the next level now with Coda and all this. I'm really, looking forward to what else to come to Coda right now. And one thing that is really the difference is, what about applications? I mean, Coda is only web-based, isn't it? So there's no, there's an iOS application.
Yeah, there's an iOS.
Yeah, that's right. So I can actually create my apps with this, but there's no Mac app or anything like this. Is this planned, or maybe you have a different perspective on this, and the browser is actually the future productivity system? I'm not saying what I think about this.
Yeah, we could go deep on browsers. I mean, I guess sort of two things to say here. One is that, docs travel really well in a browser, and people are used to docs and sheets traveling well in a browser. And so I think that's why we started there.
Thanks to Google.
We've seen tons of success there. And like you said, we have an iOS and an Android app as well. I think, not philosophically opposed to a desktop app by any means, just hasn't been top of our priority list. I think we've prototyped it a handful of times. I expect us to build that. One of the things that we sort of stacked ahead of it was performance. So I can talk about the roadmap too, but oftentimes there's a discussion on like, will a desktop app help us get faster? And so we've been, really invested in performance lately and starting to roll out a bunch of updates there. But yeah, no philosophical opposition to desktop apps or anything. Think the browser is sort of the familiar place for docs and sheets.
Yeah. So I think it's great that you have an iOS or iPhone version and Android version and so on, because this is really where it becomes difficult to use a browser in order to run the app. But I don't see really the big advantage of these native Mac apps and Windows applications, because I have the feeling, looking at ClickUp and so on, they become slower. You have a different set of, if you don't, you know that better than me, but it is essentially, you can do either a native app really, or just a web application running in a canvas or in a framework in the app, isn't it? So I think it just brings another layer of support and issues that you raise with this. Yeah, let's go away from this now. But I want to talk about the databases. This is something that's the reason why I started heavily using Notion. And it is the connection between the different databases. So let me give you an example. I have a people's database where, all the people's inspiration, research, collaboration, and so on, I can put into one database. And then I have a videos database, and I put in all the YouTube videos that I watched. And then I simply pull up the person, running this channel, and they are connected. So whenever I look at the person, I see all the videos coming up. When I look at this video, I see obviously the person running this. So this is just in a nutshell. And I know we can do related databases on Coda as well. But what about backlinks? This needs to be come up because backlink is the new word of 2021, isn't it? It was already in 2020, but it will be. If you don't have a backlink in 2021, then you are out. Okay. What's your opinion on that? What's your opinion on that? Blame Rome Research for that. I mean, from a technical point of view, it's not that difficult to implement backlinks, isn't it? Because it's already there. The information, what is connected with each other, is already there. So you have mentions on Coda, isn't it? I can mention another page. So what's the point not giving me the backlink on the other end?
When you say backlink, I just want to make sure I understand what's in your head. Is
I'm not talking about backlinks in SEO. Sorry again?
Is just what's in your head? Is it Rome's version of backlinks? Is it Notion's version of backlinks? Is it something else?
Oh, I'm talking about Notion and Rome Research backlinks, which is both the same, or what's the difference?
Well, I guess I'll tie it back to the lookup thing first, and then we'll come back to backlinks. So I mean, I think you hit it like right on the head in the first part. Like basically, relational databases and making those more accessible turns out to be really important. You're an investor, you have a list of people and you have a list of companies. You're a YouTuber, you have a list of videos and a list of people. There's always some relation between these things. And so I think, the start of Coda really focused on this idea that like, not only databases are important, but the linkage between these two databases are important. And being able to pull context across them is really important. So one way that you do that in Coda is you have a lookup column. You can just choose, hey, I want the videos table to look up from the people table, and then I can easily sort of link those two things. And then on the videos table, you can do what we call project out. You can basically take data from the people table and sort of place it on the videos table. So it's sort of functionally possible to do that, and you see that in a lot of docs in our gallery. In terms of sort of backlinks, and I think one of the unique insights it seems from some of the Rome's work and to some degree Notion's work is just this idea of making it automatically possible to find connections across information. And so that's something that we've thought about a bunch and have a bunch of prototypes on, and something that I expect we'll get to. And in particular, I'm talking about connections that you might not have seen otherwise. So lookup tables are where there's a concrete structure. In this case, I'm talking about you're talking about a specific YouTuber, and somewhere else in this doc there's a mention of that particular YouTuber. It's completely unstructured, and you want to see it in context of what you're doing now. I think we have some unique approaches to this when we get to it. We're not actively working on it right now. But I expect we'll get to some version of this connected data.
Just want to be clear here. Why I was mentioning the database connection and the backlinks in the same context. In Notion, I can connect the databases, and then I can mention items from the database in my block of text. So inline. And this means I connect my text and my notes with the database information. And I'm not really using the automatic graph building thing from Roam Research. I'm using Roam Research as well in the test case for my business, where I write down all the meeting minutes. This is very interesting, actually, really, when you have the daily notes. That's really a good approach, that you end up with, you just take the notes and in the end you will find everything that you're looking for. That's a good thing. However, I'm more of the architect, I would say, rather than the gardener in this case. And I'm using Notion and building up these networks. And this is really the missing link in Coda for me, because I really started using Coda and I really like the things. But this was the moment when I thought, it makes it hard to connect the dots. So I can make the databases and I can take notes, but I mean, I'm a perfectionist. That's really an issue. And I want to have everything connected. So when I take notes, I come always to the point where I don't take notes at all, because I'm too afraid they are redundant in the end. So yeah. So I think this is really the reason why backlinks so important. So for example, when I write about my ICOR framework, I can go to my ICOR framework and then I see all the nodes backlinked, the different pages that are coming up. So is this one thing which I saw the difference in Notion? I have one line which is essentially a page I can add there in the database, and in Coda it's not a page, it's a item with information. So I can't press on it and I have a new doc or page out of this. Is this anything you want to change in the future? Come on, you mentioned it on Twitter. It wasn't you on Twitter, but Coda mentioned it on Twitter that yeah. Maybe we will bring this up. So obviously,
yeah. No, I can confirm that's something that we're working on, something that we want to solve for sure. I think we may do it in a slightly unique way, but yeah, it's something that we want to solve. And going back to one of the things that you said, I think it is important to recognize that, like in the case where you have videos and people, if you're just writing meeting notes in the canvas and you want to mention one of those people, you can mention one of those database entries, right? Yeah. And that way, whenever you go back and review those notes, like you can click on that person and see the full context of that person.
Oh, right. So I missed that out. Yeah. All right. Okay. Yeah. The only thing that's
sort of
okay. Then I take this back. It's already there, guys. For this reason, the most important thing is there. Yeah, it is. There are now these people like me coming up and saying, yeah, what about this and this and this? But I'm sure that the vast majority don't even scratch the surface of the things that you can do with these tools. And they just need a place to take notes. And yeah, I think that was a very interesting talk here. I'm really excited. I mean, you are definitely on my list of tools to watch, as you might have had the feeling as well. And I can't wait to talk to you again, hopefully, later this year to see how far Coda came. And if I switched, we don't know. Anything you want to share with the community before we close the interview?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, if it's useful, I'm happy to talk a little bit about like roadmap or any of the stuff.
Absolutely. I mean, people would kill me if I tell you, oh, no. I mean, you're the first one in these interviews actually want to talk about the roadmap. And I see already the comment down on Tom, shut up now. Let him talk. Okay, just go ahead. Let us know what is coming to Coda.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess two things to mention. Like one is I'm incredibly proud of how fast the team ships. If you go to coda.io/updates, the team is working overtime and working really fast.
How big is the team?
We're about 95 people now.
All right.
Yeah. So it's a team and a tool that improves very fast. And you can see lots of examples of that if you go through the community. If you go to coda.io/updates, you can see all the stuff that we're shipping every day. Just shipped forms, about to ship, in the midst of shipping a lot of performance updates, which is really exciting. So the three main themes I would just leave you with for roadmap. One is sort of foundational elements, and that's piggybacking on my performance comment. So people are doing crazy, interesting things in Coda every day, surprising all of us in the best way possible. It's also, important that the tool scales with their expectations. Very large companies, very large data sets, big docs, and so performance has been a big focus for us. Second thing is what we call the simple cases. So, Coda gets a lot of praise for being very powerful. We talked about automations, Zapier API, buttons, et cetera. One of the things we want to do in 2021 is really nail those simple cases, meeting notes, project brief, the written word in Coda needs to just be delightful and excellent and fast. Commenting, collaboration, sort of all of these have to be really good. And the basic idea behind that is we think we can do a great job at that. We can sort of win more users with that. They can start to see some of the other powerful capabilities inside of Coda and start to trust that it can do, small things, simple things, meeting notes, et cetera, also powerful things. So that's really core and key, and look for a bunch of updates there. The third one's really exciting. It's basically, dovetailing on our conversation about the ecosystem and packs. We built packs with the idea that anybody should be able to build one. And to date, we've been building all the packs. We have a really fast engineering team. That's great. But at the same time, just like all platforms, when you start to open things up, they get really interesting. And, people build things that you didn't expect. They connect this to internal tools. They connect it to tools that you would have never in a million years thought of. And so one of the things that we're working really hard on is taking this idea of packs, making it so that anyone can build them, and really growing an ecosystem around Coda beyond the one that is already, sort of blossoming with Zapier and the API, and a bunch of our sort of core makers and partners. So that to me is really exciting. That is like a next evolution in platform. You get people making things that really embed them differently in workflows, which I think I'm excited about. Yeah.
That is awesome. I mean, the info about the packs makes really Coda unique then. I can't think of other tools in this area that opens up this easy. And just one last note on this part as well. I mean, I was one of the guys in the big companies building their own tools because there was no proper solution. And this is what many companies, they have their IT department, so they start building something. And then, it is not maintained the right way and things like this. So you got the aisles, and then you have to clean up stuff. Here, I think these people will be very happy. So I think there's also the potential that in these companies, you have people learning Coda and actually building this for their companies. So thank you very much. Very excited about this. I will go back and figure that out and update my review. So I got some complaints in the comments below that I didn't dig too deep in this. Thank you very much for giving us these deep insights now into Coda, and we surely see the difference now between Coda and Notion. I have to say it again, sorry. And can't see to see you next time.
Awesome.
Bye, thank you.
Glad to come back. Thanks so much.